This is an organization I've watched for a long time, and I'm very happy to be able to present what they're doing in terms of capacity building in Africa. The African Development Foundation Act of 1980 created a new independent agency designed to bypass layers of government inefficiencies by working directly with the neediest communities in Africa. US ADF has a unique 7-part mission. 1, model high effectiveness and low overhead operations. 2, focus program activities on marginalized communities in Africa. 3, invest in Africans and their ideas through participatory development. 4, ensure projects produce long-term social and economic results. 5, promote African-led and managed field project support. 6, achieve the highest levels of openness and transparency. And 7, support and develop an equal opportunity, results-driven staff that rewards hard work, dedication to the mission, and personal success. Now, many government agencies and private organizations have missions that contain broad goals to help those in need, but not all actually live up to them. Having watched this government agency for more than 20 years, I can honestly say that they've made the effort to make their mission a reality, which is why I asked them to join us today to explain how they've been able to empower local people. The member organizations of the U.S. Civil Society Coalition for African Trade and Investment have long supported the concept of capacity building. One of our members described much of the American and other foreign efforts in this regard as rain in the desert, which can be furiously undertaken, but in the end leaves little sign that it ever happened. The reason is that, while well-intended, foreign management of aid programs demonstrates a lack of trust in the people who live in these countries and fails to completely make stakeholders of people in whose interest these programs are created. US ADF has found a way to make empowerment real. To give an overview of US ADF operations and tell us how this mission is being accomplished, please welcome our next panel. We have David Blaine, who is Performance Management Advisor at US ADF, certainly the right person to tell us how this thing is done. We have Mary Malunga from the National Association of Businesswomen, a US ADF partner in Malawi, and Timothy Nzoika, the US ADF Kenya representative. It's a new program that he's opening. First of all, David, tell us how US ADF has been able to turn over so much of your program to the communities you serve in Africa. I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation on that.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think it's best understood how ADF has turned over our operations if you understand a little bit about our model. So I promise not to kill you death by PowerPoint, but to just give you a brief overview of how ADF works, because the reason we're successful in turning over our operations in Africa is because it's core to our operating model. So I want to give you just a quick overview of what that looks like. As Greg said, we are a small government agency, so we're not an NGO, but we're actually funded by the U.S. government. We're what's known as a public corporation. I'm David Blaine, and on our panel are Mary and Timothy, and we'll hear from them in a minute. Just to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of who we are. This is our footprint. We're in 20 different countries across Africa. We have approximately 400 grants in 20 different countries that represent, as we speak right now, about $60 million of money that is being invested in local organizations and groups and enterprises across Africa. We have a staff here in Washington of just under 50, and if we count our partners and representatives in Africa, we probably have just over 100 people. The bottom line for ADF is results. So we're all about doing development that leads to results. And when we measure results, we're looking for new economic growth or economic activity within Africa. And so it's not the money that we send or we invest in organizations there, but it is what is being produced with that money by the local organizations and groups themselves. A unique thing about the way ADF operates, in addition to being led and directed by Africans in Africa, is that our grant money does not go through intermediary organizations, but goes directly to the grassroots groups to fund the ideas that are generated from at the local level. So right now, our current portfolio of grants, which is just over 400 grants, are generating, as we speak, an additional $250 million of new economic activities in these localized areas, and are benefiting over 700,000 people. And I think the important thing is that is the model working? I think you have to look at that third figure, which is the sustainability factor. Are the groups continuing to function and produce after ADF finishes its grant period? And so we've got a pretty good track record going in terms of a sustainable set of benefits. Greg mentioned our priorities, but really what makes us unique, a unique niche player in this world, in the Africa Development Forum, if you will, is our four key program priorities, which is to focus on marginalized populations. So we're very targeted in where we're going after these grants, where these grants go. We're trying to find groups and areas that are being underserved by the current development community. I'd mentioned direct investments, and I think that's a unique factor. We, again, entrust and empower local groups and organizations themselves to manage and use the grant funding to grow their production capabilities and ultimately their access to global markets. We are very results-oriented, and again, when we talk about results, we're looking for two primary things. Is there economic benefit or economic growth occurring at that local level, and is that translating into some level of social benefits? And we'll hear more about that in a moment with some specific examples. And I think that the thrust of this workshop is how is it that we got to this point where really we have no expatriates in Africa. All of our programs and operations are led and managed by Africans. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we made that happen. Let me just give you just a quick overview of what our model is. It's really based on three principles, which are local technical support. So Mary is an example of a local technical support provider. So part of ADF's budget goes to funding local service or technical support and service providers to provide support directly to our grassroots grantees. Basically, our grants go to, we have a budget of around $30 million each year. About $25 million of that 30 go directly to grants. Those grants really represent two basic parts down there at the bottom of the triangle. Most of the groups that we work with are at the very early stages of their commercial activities. So the first grant that we would often undertake with a group is called an enterprise development grant. That allows that group to develop some internal capacities and capabilities around planning, accounting, put together a business plan, some basic management structures to best utilize resources that come in Wave 2, which is the Enterprise Expansion Grant. Normally, 1 and 2 can take anywhere from 2 to 5 years to be completed. So we recognize that it takes time to develop a group from a very basic level to a level where they can go to number 3 and access commercial markets. And so a lot of AGOA is focused on number 3, getting groups access to a global marketplace. We pretty much are engaged in groups prior to number 3. We're working on getting local cooperatives, organizations, small businesses, and enterprises ready to engage into the commercial marketplace through this two-step program. And so step 1, we provide grants up to $100,000 per group. Step 2, we can provide another grant up to $250,000, and we're capped at that level by our legislation. I guess that's enough theory for now. I wanted to give Mary and Timothy an opportunity to talk a little bit about how this actually works on the ground. And so we've got 2 examples, and then we're going to kind of turn it back to the panel to engage your questions. So Mary?
Come up there.
Yeah. Oh, you can just,
I could sit here. Thank you very much. Mary Malunga, I'm the Program Director for the United States African Development Foundation partner organization in Malawi, which is the National Association of Business Women. NABI, we entered a cooperative agreement with the US ADF in December of 2008, and we started providing grants to grassroots groups in Malawi from 2009. Currently, we have a portfolio of 12 projects, 4 of which enterprise development grants that David has just talked about, and 8 of them are enterprise expansion grants. Now, I'll give an example of one of the enterprise expansion grants that has been given to one of the grassroots groups in Malawi, which is the Zikometso Farmers Association. This association is based in the southern region of Malawi, that is Mulanje district. It is one of the poor regions of Malawi. It is an association now of over 4,000 smallholder farmers. And these farmers have been growing bird's eye chilies for several number of years. And they belong to an association called the National Association of Smallholder Farmers Association in Malawi. Prior to receiving this ADF grant, all they did was grow chilies and sell them in the raw form. Now, the grant that they received last year has enabled them to procure machinery that will enable them to add value to their bird's eye chilies. So far, they have been able to buy 12 metric tons of bird's eye chilies from the farmers. They have managed to procure machinery to add value, as I mentioned, and this will enable them to produce chili powder and chili sauce, which would obviously enable them to get higher prices for their chilies than what they had been getting before, just selling the chilies in its raw form. Their incomes so far, since they received the grant last year, have increased by 5%. That is the income of the farmers. And we're expecting that by the end of the project, in 3 years, the income will increase more than that directly to the farmers. Their sales revenue also has increased by about 180% from the time that they started the grant up to now. And we're expecting that at the end of the grant, obviously, their sales revenue should even increase more, and that they'll be selling the chili powder and the chili sauce. I think I'll stop at that for now. Thank you.
And Timothy has an example for us from Uganda.
Okay, thank you very much, David. My name is Timothy Nzioka, and I double as the country rep in Uganda, where I'm transiting now to Kenya, and I'm also senior advisor to our president. The example that I'm just about to give is of a small family-held business that we supported back in 2007, sorry. And before we went in, this company was making animal feed as well as human food. And they were buying raw materials from middlemen who bulked the produce from farmers. We all know that concept, where middlemen who have got cash and they go to buy from farmers, they exploit the farmers in a big way. So when we went in, we were looking at 2 areas of support. Supporting the company to improve its own internal systems, at the same time improve the supply chain working directly with the farmers. So with our grant of about $80,000, this company was able to work with 400 women, mainly women farmers who are growing raw materials that the company requires. Their capacity build to the extent that they were able to register 4 different legal entities in form of cooperatives and sign forward contracts with this company with predetermined minimum prices. Those 4 groups are now able to come back to ADF to request for additional funding to improve their operations. As far as the company is concerned, we were looking at human resource and management areas. We were able to help them set up a proper accounting system. We helped them set up human resource and recruit qualified personnel. And they have now come back to us. As we talk, we have given them the 2nd level of our funding so that they can improve their production. They are going to buy new equipment so that they can improve the capacity of production and buy most of the produce from these farmer groups. Now, with that support alone, we have seen the company increase its revenues by more than 75%. The income to the farmers who are supplying the raw materials has increased by ×4, which is 400%. And that is just the element of when they're able to deal directly with the people who are consuming the raw materials other than going through the middlemen. And the capacity for them to be able to negotiate, not only with this company, but they are free to sell to any other company because they are bulking together, they are doing quality control, they know what the market needs. So that's just an example of a project, and we have got such other projects that we are also supporting. Thank you.
All right, before I turn it over to the audience to ask questions, I know you haven't been able to ask any today. Believe me, I will let you have a chance to ask. I just have a couple of brief questions. Excuse me. First for David. I used to work in radio, and a lot of the radio network, and a lot of the reporters that we had were in the field. They were stringers. And I knew how difficult that was to manage a whole network of people that you don't even see. You converse by phone and internet. What are the challenges of dealing with a workforce that is so diversified and so spread out?
Well, the biggest challenge obviously is communication. The more we can be in contact with people in Africa, the better operations is going to flow. So at ADF, what we've done is organized Africa into regional groups. So we have 5 regions. We're consolidating that down. But basically, we have regional directors who are responsible for 4 to 5 different countries. And those regional directors have a small staff. And so the Washington regional director and field operations staff are basically in day-to-day contact with the countries that they oversee and are responsible for. So the big thing is communication. What that means is that often our staff here in Washington make trips to Africa to help understand what's going on, provide some input and oversight, and really, in order for Africa operations to work, it's all about communications and training people to do the work that the U.S. taxpayer expects. So we, being a U.S. government agency, we have a lot of accountability, responsibilities. So that's pretty much the biggest training aspect for us to do here in Washington. The actual technical support and development support comes from our experts on the ground. And so we're providing more of the accountability and reporting function, but we leave the development work to the experts in Africa.
Okay. Mary, when, as a partner of ADF, when you're helping these organizations, these companies to start up and expand, what are you looking for from them to make sure that what they're doing is going to be sustainable in the long run?
As was mentioned already, that the USADF invests in Africans and their ideas. So when a group is being provided a grant, it is a group that already has been in existence for at least 2 years. So it's not like a startup group per se, but it is a group that has been maybe struggling with their business, and they just required some funding or some equipment to assist them with their business. So as the grants expire, we make sure that they have a sound marketing strategy in place and also a business plan that will ensure that after the grant expires, the project doesn't end there, but it will have to continue and be sustainable beyond project life.
Okay. And Timothy, you're starting a new program in Kenya. You told us about the success of Uganda. To what extent do you have to adapt your model to the different countries that you operate in? How different will Kenya be from what you do in Uganda?
Thank you for that question. The environment in Kenya is very different. We are not going to operate nationwide. We are focusing on a very marginalized region called Turkana. And this is a community where 75% of the household live on relief. And what ADF we are trying to do is to go in and see whether we can turn the tables and the community is able to produce their own food. So the plan in Kenya is focusing on food security, nutrition, and incomes. We are going to be dealing with the two set of communities. There is a farming community that is doing irrigation along two main rivers, and then we have the bigger community that is keeping animals. Now there is no much link between those two. And what we want to do is to set up systems which link the two communities, especially for nutrition, and that resources that are being used for relief can go to development work. So that is very different. But again, we will not be telling them what to do. We want to go and we provide the resources they require so that they can actualize their dreams.
All right. And now let's have some questions from the audience. Imani?
Imani Countess with Trans-Africa Forum, and like Greg, I'm a big fan of ADF, and for many in the advocacy community, we look at ADF as one of our successes because it was through the efforts of many in the advocacy community that ADF was created by Congress along with its sister organization, the Inter-American Foundation. We've heard a lot this past day and a half about the need for regional integration. And while there's been, support for the successes of AGOA, what many have said is that it is more important for Africans to be able to increase trade within regions. And so I have a question about ADF and its relationship to the promotion of regional integration, and to what extent do your regional directors work to facilitate sort of cross-national linkages within industry? I also have a question about capacity building, and I'm currently, I don't know if I said it, but I used to work for ADF, so so that also accounts for a particular love. But that was 10 years ago. So I'm wondering about now the capacity building component of the work. And what are some of the indicators that you use to show that capacity has been built? That was another key theme that we heard particularly today, that there is a need to ensure that after a project ends, that people do have the capacity to continue. And you've said it, but I'm just wondering if you can show us a little bit more how that's actually done. And then I was particularly struck by this last example of the company in Kenya that you said that ADF has supported. I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit more about that. Who actually owns the company? What is the relationship between those 500 farmers and the company? How is it that you can tell that capacity has been built? Again, concretely, what are the indicators that you use? And I'll just close by saying, using that example in particular, it can make some in the U.S. a little bit nervous because that model can be a bit exploitative. And so, at least in terms of how we're familiar with it here in the U.S. So I just wonder if you can expand upon that a little bit more.
Okay, great. So I've got three sort of categories: this regional integration question, a question about capacity development or capacity building, what are our indicators, and a little bit more information about Numa Feeds, which, again, when we look at our portfolio of 400 projects across Africa, the small and medium-sized enterprise model is a small set of it. I'd say the majority of our projects are more like the projects Mary talked about, more cooperatives, community-based groups, as opposed to small and medium-sized businesses. So that's becoming less and less a part of our portfolio. It's more of a, I would call it a legacy project with ADF. But Timothy, would you want to talk something about the regional integration, what sort of collaboration is taking place in Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, anything going on with Tanzania? Because we are organized on a regional basis. So what's happening there?
At two levels. One, looking at the people who are operating on the ground, there is a lot of communication and sharing of experiences across the different countries. When I'm based in Kampala, working with my colleagues who are based in Rwanda, this is something that is on continuous basis, to the extent that I know a lot about the projects that we are funding in those other countries, the same way they also know about what we are doing in our country. So that is number one. Number two, majority of the groups that we are funding, they are looking at markets within the region, not just looking at Europe and America. Because as David started by saying, we are operating with groups that are not necessarily ready to venture into the international markets. So the Numa feed that I talked about, they are now looking at Southern Sudan as a market. They are looking at Rwanda because this company is based in Western Uganda, not very far away from the border with Rwanda. We have another company called Agrogenetic Technologies that has supplied a lot of its produce to Rwanda. This is planting materials. And we have another one, Magancho, that is also trading a lot in both Southern Sudan, Kenya, and Rwanda. So there is that level of trying to look at the markets at that level and sharing experiences. We have had also seminars where we bring in some of the producer groups to come and learn from the other country on issues that we feel they are facing, which has already been handled by the other projects. Now, there is a question, if you allow me, that she is asking, which is very valid. And if you look at the project that I just gave example, these are farmers who have not known any other market other than the middlemen who go during harvest time when prices are so much depressed. And the only opportunity that is there is for them first to get organized, build their capacity, do bulking, do quality control, and then they can now start asking themselves, do they want to continue doing business with the Numa feeds, or do they want to look at other markets? And when they are doing that, it is important for them to have an initial market. So Numa feed provided that bridging opportunity. But if you look at the rest of the portfolio, as David was saying, we are working directly with the farmers who are already organized, they are bulking. We have cases of women who have been growing rice, upland rice, and then we go in, we help them to bulk, and then start doing processing. They process the rice, they pack, and they start selling to the supermarkets. So we have a mix of that, but we build the capacity of the people depending on where they are today, so that in another year or so, then they can move to a different level of productivity.
I think this lady here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, my name is Rosemary Sagir. I'm the president of Sagiros International Inc., which is a profit-making company, empowering myself. I'm also the president of Hope for Tomorrow, trying to empower women through microfinance to empower them. So I have to empower myself, make money, and make other people make money. Now, it has been very, very difficult to get in touch with USA ADF. I've tried to communicate with them, to talk to them about what they do in Africa. When you go there, they tell you, go to Kenya. Where do you come from? The first thing they say, where do you come from? We have regional offices. And I don't deal with regional offices, because you will go to the regional offices, they'll tell you, go to the United States, because they know a common man will not go back to the United States. So what I'm asking here is, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I'm so happy you came. How do you look at Africa? Africa has 53 countries.
Yes.
Different people, speaking different countries, different culture and tradition. And I hear you talk about integrating in this place, looking at education, training, who has not done business or not done business. But what do you look at education? Language barrier. Now China is coming from China, now trying to teach Africans Chinese so that they can work for them. And the Africans themselves who live in Africa need to learn into their own language, looking at language barrier. Business, how do they incorporate? You can't say 2 years, because somebody has to start somewhere. We have to empower them through small, from basic to where they are growing. So let's look at reality and see that we empower Africans. In reality, don't tell me to go to Kenya, to Uganda, or whatever it is. We want to make sure those grassroots people are the ones to be empowered, to be taught business through education and skill training for empowerment. How do you look at training and skill training, and then language barrier, translate the languages into where local man can read to do business? How do you look at it? Let's not go into big stuff. The Africans just need basic education, basic things to do small businesses and help themselves and their children. Thank you.
Okay, let me just start with a couple of things. First of all, we look at our work in Africa basically in 2 steps. So we are all about capacity development and training. That's why we have our grants in 2 different steps. What we call the development grant and then the expansion grant. The primary indicators of that development grant are all about training, helping to develop the capacity of that organization. Training, guess what? In a local language. That's why we have local partners and technical service providers, not expatriates, but people from that country who can speak those languages and deliver relevant business training and planning necessary for those groups to then move to that next level, which we call expansion and growth. So those are 2 things, but let me give Mary a chance. Do you have some comments on how we approach our work in Africa?
Yes, David. As a matter of fact, the capacity building aspect, the training aspect, is the most crucial aspect in terms of the developing the grantees. And as David has rightly said, it is the role of partners like my organization to work directly with the grantees, because USAIDF do not have offices in Africa. So they work through partners like my organization. So it is our role to mobilize the grantees because we know who they are. And it is our role, after they have been given the grants, to go in and train them. And most of the times, indeed, like, for example, in Malawi, sometimes the training is done in vernacular so that we ensure that the training material is actually reaching the beneficiaries in a very, very effective way. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I? Yeah, I just wanted to add one more point. One of the reasons why you might have been referred to Africa is because all the funding goes to Africa according to the legislation. And it is funding indigenous people. If you sent in an application from anywhere to Washington, it will be sent to the relevant country, because in Washington, as they said, they are not evaluating applications. They need someone on the ground who is able to verify information, who is able to go and look at what is happening, who is able to have to collect information about the institution or the person who is making application. We are using taxpayers' money, and there is need for accountability, as he started by saying. And application can come from anywhere. Someone saying they do all sorts of things. There is need for that verification.
So you are telling with the indigenous people, what about other people? I thought you were telling us people as communities. So indigenous is another part, and just community empowering people. So this we say ADF is dealing with only indigenous people in countries, or what?
Yeah, in the countries, we, like, for example, you are from Africa, but you live here. ADF is not going to fund you.
I can't ask anything from ADF. I just want to see how do they operate in Africa, and how are the people, how are they people benefiting out of it?
Well, now, I think they've explained to you that they're dealing with people who are on the ground and not people who are outside the country who want to come back. That's their mandate. Patrick? You're next, ma'am. Okay?
I'm Lois Tett from Minority Women-Owned Businesses and my own business, LTS Marketing Solutions. I understand from some Kenyans that there are problems with Kenyans trying to fish. Do you know anything about that? When the Kenyans come to bring their boats, the enemy beats you back, and you can't fish in your own seas. We have a need. We're going to have a crucial need. We have it now for seafood because of this oil spill. And I want to know how that business, how we can get fish from you, and if this is true or not, that you are actually having that problem, and how can we help you get over it. We once helped get $100 million into Nigeria for the water program through the Mandela Fund. And we are looking out in ways we do to help Africa. We want to know if that is the problem there where you are.
Timothy, you're the Kenyan expert.
Okay, I will try to answer that. One of the things we also don't pretend is to be experts in everything. As much as our funding is restricted to producer groups and people who are doing businesses in country, we also work very closely with other partners and the host governments. So when something like what you just mentioned comes up to our attention, we have access to relevant government machinery that we discuss, we lobby, but we do not go in and work with the government to implement policy changes, because one of the requirements is that we do not fund governments. We don't have a dollar going into the government. It has to go outside the government mechanism. You also know that we have USAID that has got a bigger mandate, and that funds African governments. currently with a huge budget in agriculture through the development of CADIPs, where several African countries have already signed their bids. So these are things that we also discuss with our colleagues at USAID and the embassy. But ADF doesn't do it directly.
Okay. And now back to the gentleman who...
I'm glad I did defer to the young lady in the back, because that dovetails with my question. Patrick Wilson, U.S. Civil Society Coalition for African Trade and Investment. You mentioned spices, and you mentioned rice, I believe?
Rice, yes.
Rice?
Yeah.
And seafood. And you mentioned the type of programs. For yesterday and today, we emphasize SPS, sanitary phytosanitary conditions. In your training, do you have that component? If you don't, you should. And the component that you're investing in your training, who would the U.S. agency be that you've identified to provide that type of training?
Well, again, to understand the ADF model is, one, you have to look at where do the applications come from and what kind of projects do we fund. Again, we're not what I call a top-down organization. What we do is by legislation, we're mandated to respond to the development requirements and requests from Africa at a grassroots level. So again, we get lots of applications in all the different countries that we operate in. And as Timothy said, these applications come in. There's more applications than there are funds to support. And so we make a selection on those applications based on our criteria. Are they a marginalized group? Is it going to generate economic benefits? Are there social impacts going to be involved? And we work on a budget for that particular request based on that application, that original idea that comes from the community group itself.
David, I'm not talking about the process. All I'm talking about is, you mentioned with respect to the spices, and now you've moved into processing of sauces, chili sauces, and then you talked about packaging the rice to sell.
Yeah.
Well, there's an SPS component in that. There's a safety component in that. So what I'm saying is, when you do this, when you package it, are you properly documenting those sources on how you're doing it? So when you sell it, if you're going to sell it regionally, you still have to be aware of the SPS. And then when you sell it internationally, you're still going to have to be aware of the SPS. So that's what I'm looking at, not the process.
Okay, great. Sorry, let me turn it over to Mary and to Timothy to address your specific question.
Okay. The training that is provided to the groups include issues of hygiene and HACCP. I'm not sure about the full meaning of HACCP. Even just any other food. It's a food standard.
Okay, I'll let you finish.
Yeah, okay. So, for example, in Malawi, what we do is we build in a component of training. We actually hire consultants for the groups to train them in hygiene, packaging, and all these quality issues. And also, we provide funding for certification. For example, in Malawi, we have the Malawi Bureau of Standards, who has to certify, especially if we are dealing with food. They have to have a certificate to certify that the food is fit for human consumption. On issues of SPS, for example, the groups that we're working with in Malawi currently, they haven't started exporting. So I think when they reach that level, when they're ready to export, then that training will be relevant to them at that moment.
Yeah, just a quick one, that we have a mix of projects in Uganda, those who are doing marketing just within the country, but we also have projects that are exporting their produce to Europe and to America. So depending on the level where they are, there is component of that training. If we get a project that is looking at international markets, then they need to understand first, when we are developing the proposal, we have to look at, you are looking at US. Do you have contacts? Who is going to buy? What are the requirements? Certification. And therefore, we have to build that in the grant so that we get the right people, qualified people to train them, to prepare them, to send the samples to the paperwork that is required to identify how the channel is going to operate. So we do all that. But for the national one, just as she said, we also have Uganda National Bureau of Standards, and they have to do their certification because we don't want any business to do illegal business. We want them to go through the legal channel.
I would just like to have a sidebar with you later on because I've visited some of the facilities and we need to talk.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I think this
thanks.
gentleman down front here, and then this lady,
Thank you.
and then you.
Jeremy Ndaishimie, senior pastor in Burundi, where we are working with schools to train the new leaders in 25 years. I'm very happy for your organization. I know some of the projects. I know microfinance in Burundi, they are doing well. I know also a group of the people who raise fruit, they are also doing well. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
I want to know how, because we are working with the communities, how long do you work with an organization? What kind of the requirement needs for someone to have the grant? Thank you.
Well, if we engage with a group at the very beginning of our process, that is at the development grant stage, that grant can last up to 2 years. And if that grantee develops properly and has a good business plan and a growth and expansion plan, then they can apply for the second grant, which might last another 3 to 5 years. So the period of time that we can be with a grantee may range anywhere from 2 years if they don't progress to up to 7 years. And that's a lot of time for us to develop capacity and capability, which I think is one of the reasons why we have this 80% sustainability factor. It's something we look at all of our grantees, we follow them for 3 years after the grant expires to see if those grantees are progressing. But as Mary mentioned, in order to qualify really as an initial grantee, we're looking for some level of organizational capability that the group has already formed themselves in some way, and that we're not dealing with just an individual, but we're dealing with a sort of an organized group. And then we have, as Timothy mentioned, we have a lot of due diligence that we have to walk through before we actually enter into a grant agreement with people.
Okay, I think this lady.
My name is Elizabeth Sichinga, NGOCC Zambia. My question is, I'm rather more concerned about, we've been here talking about AGOA, and US ADF sounds quite interesting, especially that it's providing grants to grassroots organizations, and I think we are trying to help them start structuring and get organized at that level so that they are able to compete in a marketplace. Now, I'm wondering to what extent your technical people on the ground are working closely with AGOA. At one point, are they linking? Because you're providing a lot of money, grants, that's a big money going down to Africa. But is there a connection so that you can build those groups to a level where they can rise up and get to the AGOA level and connect with markets in America. And I think that's where my question also then links to what the doctor is questioning. Are those standards also being put in place? Do you have experts, AGOA experts, trained who are on the ground in Africa, who are Africans like them, who are able to interpret AGOA and link with all these funds, the grants you're sending? If that's not happening, then we won't go anywhere, because they'll get to a level, they won't grow to a level where they will mature to join AGOA and link up to the markets in America. We should build them from there. We women are saying, get us in at that level, grow us, let us get up and fight the battle at that level where we can't compete right now. So, and I'm not sure how many countries in Africa that you are providing that service to, but I hope all AGOA countries that have or have qualified in AGOA, I hope you can connect those dots and links so that the funds, at least when you come 10 years, when we come back here and to discuss, you'll be able to say, USADF was able to give grants at this level. We've matured this number of groups, and they are now at AGOA level, and this is how much they're making. Thank you.
Very good.
We have about 10 minutes left, so if we could make the questions very short so we can get to them. I think this gentleman in the back had a question. You still?
My name is Mohammed El Hadben. I have an international management in Fargo, North Dakota. I have just a small comment about Rosemary's question. There are so many programs existing for Africa that are benefiting for the U.S. business basis. And it's almost like the USADF, but they are grants. They are not, they are loans, they are not grants. So for everyone who will be interested for information about that, I have some of them that I provide to my people, that my partners that I work with them, and they use them, and they are useful. So it's not only this program that are in the ground. There are some other programs here for the people here that would like to have some financial help. My information are with the coalition.
I think this lady here in the red.
Mine is pretty much a comment. My organization had the opportunity to look at ADF projects in 15 countries in Africa recently. And I'm happy to confirm that our findings coincide with your analysis here right now. But being here in Washington within this forum, I think that perhaps ADF should look at the possibility of supporting policy change and policy reform. That was one of the findings that came out from our work, was that a lot of the groups did not see clearly how they could make contributions to the larger policy issues and the policy reform, how they could contribute in country and then in America. So perhaps ADF could look at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we have just a few minutes left. I wanted to say that Mr. Navdeep Sodhi is still here, the gentleman who gave us that interesting presentation about turning the bottles into fabric. So if you have questions, in addition for those for the panel, if you'd like to ask him while he's still here, that would be helpful as well. I think this gentleman with the black shirt on had the question. Yeah, the one behind him, yes.
Just a real quick question. Since your grant is about 2 to 7 years, and we're talking about uprising, educating Africa, how about in regards of the cost of, electricity, energy, and in regards to renewable energy, is there grants for our company to come to Africa to teach them about renewable energy, saving on their solar panels and wind turbine? Would you be able to support us in that regards?
Again, our grants respond to the most urgent needs of the local communities. So as an application comes forward and they said our biggest need is lighting in our village to so we can water, things like that, then that would be something we would consider. But we're not necessarily targeting specific areas of development. So we're a responsive group.
Actually, there's a gentleman from AID who's in the back, Sutherland.
Thanks. Just a point of information. One part of the U.S. government's approach to capacity building is specifically focused on export-ready companies and specifically, hopefully, targeting AGOA, but trade generally, and that's the USAID's regional trade hubs. So this is a good model. There are other approaches and other institutions out there that are focused on export readiness.
Before you give the mic up, USAID would be the agency that he would go to if he wanted to get, if we wanted to look at funding for a project in Africa. That is an organization that's not African to go to Africa to do that, correct?
It would depend on what it is. There's also Department of Commerce, Exim Bank, so it really depends on what the nature of the project is, TDA. Yeah.
Okay.
There's an alphabet soup of helpful agencies. So.
Very good. And I think last, this gentleman here with the white shirt on.
Thank you. My name is Hashim Hassan. I'm a visiting scholar from the Colin Powell Center at the City College of New York. My question is more like a curiosity than a question, really. Yeah. Regarding the funds, let's talk about Southern Sudan, for instance. You mentioned Southern Sudan, and they're going under a referendum that's coming up. So my understanding is that they're not stable. So a project like yours, how does it work, and what are the predictability? In business, of course, you need predictability. So how do you go about selecting a certain grantee, and what are the grantees that they would sustain themselves if they're prone to conflict? And that leads us to how would you prevent a conflict by sustaining certain communities? Thank you.
You want to jump in?
Okay, yeah, I can make an attempt, as well as we have not responded to our question. At the moment, we are not directly working with any groups in Southern Sudan. What we are working is with the other groups operating from countries that want to do business in Southern Sudan. However, ADF has got experience working in conflict and post-conflict areas. And ideally, as Mary and David have said, we don't create our own enterprises. We go to people who are already existing. So we want to look at what we have been able to do. We want to assess whatever you are proposing to do in the next 2-3 years. The level of prediction is purely the one of the people doing the business, but ours is to verify, to confirm, and to bring in technical expertise to ensure that the ideas that you have are practical and they will be sustainable. So if we started operations in Southern Sudan or Somalia or some other place, those are some of the things that we'll be looking at. And remember, we have got very limited resources, a budget of $30 million shared across those many countries. We can only invest in few applicants, and therefore we get 100 applications and maybe 1 or 2 qualify. And so by getting those 2, we try and do our due diligence. We are not saying that we do perfect job, 80%. It means there is a 20% where we don't do so well. So the areas that we have failed, but we learn from those failures. Now you talked about the working with the groups and linking them to AGOA, having experts so that they prepare the producers. The group of women that were here, we are privileged to be working with one of them called Marvelous, based in Tanzania. And she is exporting her produce not only to US but to other countries. So that is a very clear example of what ADF is able to do. Although she is not among my portfolio, I know her for many years because of my previous work. And I remember when I first dealt with her, we tried to open markets for her to sell to Kenya. And she didn't even know how to cross from Tanzania to Kenya. And we had to even help her with the transportation. we had to book her an hotel where she was going to stay to bring a consignment. It got stuck at the border, and one of my staff had to rush to the border town and help her to clear those goods. They came in. So it's one person who could not even do business just across the border. Today, actually, was it yesterday when she made a presentation in our office? She was talking of being in Spain, being in South Africa, being in the US, doing marketing. And now she has a model of working with women who know how to do the production, but their capacity is so low. So she's going to train them and subcontract so that those women are able now to do the production while she focuses more on quality control and marketing. And we believe that's an excellent model where we start working with one person and that goes in to support many others. The actual capacity of having people who are highly qualified in AGOA, I would say no. But we draw in expertise as needed. If I'm working in Uganda, I find a grantee that wants to do something that I have no expertise, my partner organization has no expertise, we get to our head office and we say, can we get this support? And then we look around, we get someone either locally to do that part of intervention. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's about time to close now, but I would like to give one last opportunity for one question. Our two panelists are still here from the textile panel. Does anyone have any questions for them? Unfortunately, we were unable to have time to ask questions of them. Is there a question for them? Yes, ma'am. Just a second. Just a second.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful presentation on textile and apparel, why we are fighting on cotton, whatever. That was a great presentation. You said you focus on Nigeria, and looking at your presentation, that would be a model or modified in other African countries. How can you work with other African countries in that model of your presentation? Like Kenya, let me say, everybody's saying their country, my country, Kenya. That's what I'm saying.
Well, Madam, some of these initiatives, though they originated in Nigeria and some in South Africa, but there's nothing unique that they can only happen there. So these examples can be easily replicated in other countries. I'm sure there are more water bottles in Kenya than in Nigeria, you know, because you have more tourists there. So it's for the government to pick up some of these examples and, you know, encourage investment in that area. Because the beauty of these things is that you are not competing with China, you know, because Chinese will not come to pick your bottles. This can be locally sustained, you know, which is why this is a good model, you know.
Can I pick them from America? America, we have so many bottles and
Well, let me say Americans are already recycling their bottles because they were the ones who started this and others learned from them.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thank you very much. Oh, Steve?
Let me respond just to the question about AGOA before and about how you connect the USADF to the AGOA program and so on. That was asked by, I think, our friend from our sister from Zambia. What I found this forum to be really great on is that we deal both with the micro and with the macro. And this whole discussion now is micro. It's not what I call transformational, is anecdotal, but it's how you grow Africa. You have 15 success stories, and then you go through Africa and so on. Whereas AGOA is basically, even though people interpret it the way they want, but it's really basically a macro program. It's an attempt to eliminate duties. And what happened was people wanted to go beyond AGOA, so they talked about related programs, and that's where Sutherland Miller's program, for example, is trying to translate it. So it isn't AGOA that you're really asking for. What you're really asking for is, how do I get into the export market or the market? Because the way the market goes is from local to urban to regional within Africa, and then it's what we call the all-azimuth European Union and so on. So I think my response to your question is you're correct. But initially, focus on the production, the local marketing, get the skills, and then as you move up, you may never export to the United States. You know yet. But it's not the word you don't want. I think you want to use, and I like the word export ready, but maybe the first thing you want to say is market ready, and then get to export ready. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'd like to thank our audience. But, you know, this is the 10th Civil Society Forum. I've managed 6 of them. I've been to most of them. I think this was very informative. As Steve said, we've talked about the big policy. We've talked about the average entrepreneur. And I think we've got a lot of done. We're going to develop a report from this session. This session has been recorded and will be available on the Wilson Center website in a week or so. And so we'll be able to take this and see it again and analyze some of the things that perhaps we missed, because we weren't all sitting in here every single minute. So thank my panelists for this panel and for what you all are doing and the model you're using. Hopefully the other parts of the government will listen and do the same thing. I'd really like to thank, on behalf of the U.S. Civil Society Coalition for Trade and Investment, our hosts here at the Wilson Center. They've been very hospitable to us, and certainly we've thanked my longtime friend, Steve McDonald. But there are 2 ladies I'd like to give some particular thanks and honor to, and that is Mam Hadi Doof, the lady who you saw working with the technical aspect. A lot of this was facilitated by her efforts. She's in and out all the time. There's another lady who you've seen going around, but you probably didn't know who that was. It's Justine Lindemann. I don't know if she's Justine. And the many other interns and other people, other staff here who have made this all a very enjoyable and very informative program. So thank you again, and we hope to share with you. And now Steve will close out our entire conference.
My one perk is I always get the last word. So I would like to thank you all as well. Greg has basically said it all. But let me reiterate what we said at the beginning, that this was sponsored, Shell Oil Company, Manchester Trade, Steve and Tony, along with the coalition that Greg represents and Patrick represent, who've all worked very hard on this. And your staffs as well have really worked closely with us, and we thank you. And I'm glad Greg did what I should always do and recognize my staff, who really do work very, very hard, on Heidi and Justine and Paul as well, and some other people downstairs who you don't see as much, but they work as well. I want to reiterate what Greg said, that because I've been asked by many people, where will the record be? We will be working jointly on a report that will come out eventually. It was webcast. That will be archived and be available on our website shortly. But also all the presentations that you've seen here, the slide presentations, PowerPoint presentations, will also go up on the website. So you'll be able to revisit those as well. So that'll be available. Let me also remind you that a photocopy of all the cards of all the women in the delegation of 35 are on the table out front for you to get, so you'll have their contacts. And as always, everybody says to me, well, it was a great conference, Steve. Well, the one thing I've learned in my 40 years in Africa is when to step aside and not play a role and let the experts talk. And so let's again thank this panel, representative of all the panels we've had all these 2